Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining me this morning. My name is Meg Glick, and I am a social worker at the Child Mind Institute. To meet the unprecedented mental health and parenting needs of this coronavirus crisis, the Child Mind Institute has gone borderless. We are here with gold standard clinical care, advice, and resources for children and families wherever you are, all online and accessible to everyone. Here's what we can do to support you during this crisis. We are providing gold standard mental health care remotely for new and existing patients with telehealth while maintaining the same high quality care. We have free comprehensive resources for families at childmind.org/coronavirus. You can sign up for daily parenting tips at childmind.org, and on Facebook, my colleagues and I are answering your questions just like this at 10 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday. Our Facebook group for parenting during the time of coronavirus is also up and running. We're here for you wherever you are. Please contact us for further questions about how we can help. And I hope you'll take advantage of our resources and share them with your networks. Today, we'll be discussing managing problem behavior in the time of coronavirus. I'm going to do my best to answer all your questions on this topic and others, but if I run out of time, there are two ways that you can get what you need. We'll be right back here at 4:30 p.m. this afternoon to answer more questions live. We also have a team looking through your questions daily, and they will incorporate answers into our resources at childmind.org. I've gone ahead and prepared some questions that were already asked so that we can get started thinking about problem behavior, but please feel free to send in questions live as we go. The first thing I want to start by saying is we know that problem behaviors are actually more likely to be occurring right now. Your child is off their routine, you are off your routine, and you are trying to manage so many things, likely as a parent who is both working from home, trying to teach your child from home, and also occupying your child with entertainment throughout the day as they're home with siblings. So we expect there to be problem behaviors. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It's just sort of par for the course when there's a challenging experience like this one happening in the world. So I want to start by saying that the first thing that you can do to start to manage some of these behaviors is something that you've likely already attempted, which is trying to get your child onto a more scheduled and structured routine during this time at home. That said, if initiating that routine doesn't work, right, if you've tried that and you're seeing that your child is still exhibiting more problem behaviors than usual, if you're seeing more tantrums and outbursts than are typical, which is a question that we've been getting a lot of, then there are certainly some tips that I can give you to try to start to manage those behaviors in a different way. So the first thing that we do when we're thinking about managing problem behaviors is try to understand the trigger or what's causing them, right? So the thing that we really think about is the function that a behavior is serving. So behaviors can serve a variety of functions. They can be serving the function of getting attention. They can serve the function of getting out of something or escaping something. You might likely be seeing that when it comes to school demands or tasks that a child just doesn't really feel like completing. Behaviors can also serve more of a self-regulating or self-stimulating function. So sometimes that means that nothing that we are doing or that's happening in the environment is really contributing to the behavior. It's something that the child is just doing to regulate an internal state that they're experiencing. And the last one is that behaviors can sometimes serve a tangible function, which means that the child is trying to get a tangible item out of that behavior. So likely in your household right now, that might be a preferred toy that they're trying to get access to. That might be screen time that they're trying to get access to, the iPad, right? An actual tangible item. So like I said, behaviors serve a variety of functions, and what we're really trying to do to manage behavior is understand which one of those functions your child's outbursts are serving. So how we do that is we take some data. We start by taking what's called ABC data, which means antecedent, behavior, and consequence data. You can jot this down on a piece of paper. You can start to take some notes in maybe your phone, right? Just to start to notice when and why your child's outbursts or tantrums are happening. So like I said, this data is called ABC data. The A stands for antecedent, or really the trigger of the behavior, what's coming first before the outburst starts. The second piece, the behavior, is just trying to understand the severity, what the behavior looks like. Are we talking about yelling and screaming? Are we talking about hitting and pushing? And then the last piece is the consequence. This part's really important. And consequence in this context doesn't mean a punishment or something that you are necessarily imposing upon the child. It just means what happens after. So after your child has this outburst, what's the result? Are they getting the thing that they originally wanted from the behavior? Are they getting access to that iPad? Are they getting a big hug from you, right? So there's a variety of responses that might be happening after a behavior takes place. And we call that the consequence when we're thinking about this ABC data. So take that data, start to notice patterns. Oftentimes we feel like behaviors are coming out of nowhere, but when we start to take this data, we realize that there is actually a pattern to the behavior and a function that it's serving. And once we have that information, it's a lot easier for us to fall out of the trap of reinforcing those behaviors by accident. And when I say reinforcing, I just mean making those behaviors happen more often by accident, showing the child that they're effective. And so then once we understand that data, the next thing we just want to do is be very careful to try not to have that reinforcement happen, and instead try to reinforce what we call positive opposite behaviors, or the behavior that we'd rather see, right? So rather than hitting and screaming, we'd like to see a calm, safe body, and then your child, when they're calm, can actually have access to the iPad. So that's how we think about some behavior management basics that are applicable, I guess, during this crisis, but also anytime we're thinking about managing problem behaviors. All right, seems like we've got some questions coming in live, so let me take a look. All right, so how to motivate a teen with ADHD and low motivation to do any schoolwork when school is saying it's optional. This is tricky, and I know you're in a tough spot if it feels like the work is optional. That's particularly challenging. You don't sort of have that same backup that you might have during the school year when your child is experiencing, right, what we call natural consequences of not doing the schoolwork. So where they're going to school and realizing that they don't have the homework, right, and their grades are dropping, or their teacher has a response. It sounds like right now it's sort of up to your response at home, which I want to validate sounds very tricky, very challenging for you right now. So I think the best thing to really think about doing is just try to set up some consequences like those same natural consequences that typically occur during school. Set up those natural consequences at home, meaning those can be positive consequences as well, right? So things that your child does get access to, positive results of if they're managing and doing their work. Your child, if they have ADHD, I also would imagine that they do struggle with executive functioning skills, with organizational skills, and maybe resisting doing homework because it feels overwhelming to organize, especially without the structures that are typically in place during the school year. So with this, just think about sitting down with your teen, especially since you say it's a teenager. We do want to think about being pretty collaborative in this process of trying to problem solve and figure out how much work needs to be done and when, setting up a schedule for that work and really breaking it down into these bite-sized chunks that your child feels like they can manage, followed by a reward, right? So putting that less preferred activity or that less preferred school assignment before something that's more preferred, like maybe a FaceTime session with a peer, maybe time to watch a movie, anything that's a preferred activity over the schoolwork. Really, really good question. Also try to ask your child sort of what the resistance is about too, and try to get a sense of what their goals are. So for example, if your child has a goal, right, to progress to a higher level class next year, or if they're interested in a specialized program or going to college, these are things that when you can talk them through, you can really help your child understand why it's still important to be doing some of this work now. So just try to have a collaborative conversation and get a sense of their motivation as well. All right, thank you for these live questions. These are great. Any advice for a child deliberately upsetting a younger sibling, taking away a toy, pushing, etc., and then exploding at me when I ask him about it? Really good question. This is tough, and I know one of the questions that we'd gotten earlier was about siblings who are fighting during this time. This is a time where kids are around their siblings far more than they probably ever are. That is part of, right, your children probably are going to school during the day and not having this level of contact with their siblings all week long. So it's tough. There's also a limited amount probably of toys and attention that's available, right, that's contributing to your child maybe fighting back and forth with their sibling or provoking their sibling in these ways. One thing that we know is that young kids have a particularly difficult time being responsive to conversation when they're in the midst of more of an outburst or a problem behavior. So we're better off typically waiting for that behavior to dissipate and be managed, waiting for your child to return to calm, and having the conversation about next steps when your child is kind of removed from the situation, meaning that maybe they are getting ready for bed and this behavior happened this morning. Now might be a better time as they're getting ready for bed to start to have more of that problem-solving conversation about what's going on and how they're feeling and how we can make it better. Right? In the moment, we do want to think about some strategies that we call antecedent strategies or preventive strategies, things that we can put in place to just prevent the behaviors from hopefully happening to begin with. Some of that can come from going ahead and setting up some groundwork for positive consequences if your child is behaving kindly with their sibling, right? If they are sharing toys. So if they make it through the day and they exhibit positive behavior and kindness with their sibling, that might mean that everybody gets to watch an extra TV show together before bed, or we get to read an extra book. We get some sort of positive privilege because of the positive behavior. Setting timers and setting up schedules for sharing toys can also be really helpful if your child is doing a lot of grabbing of some of, like I said before, those tangible items, right? Those can be a source of sometimes a lot of behavioral difficulties. So if you can set up a schedule so that your child knows that when this timer goes off, I actually get a turn to use that toy, or I get a turn to control the TV show that's on, that can sometimes help to manage the behaviors that are happening. That said, we expect siblings to fight. We know that that's happening more now, so do your best. But these are some tips for how to manage that a little bit. Good question. All right, here we go. My child is trying to achieve control. Assuming because there is a feeling of loss of control, how do you educate a kid that their attempt to gain control is hurting others? Really good question. This one's a little tough, I think. It depends a bit on the behaviors that you're seeing. So I would go back a little bit to that ABC data, right, and just try to get a sense of what your child's trying to achieve. I think it's a really great observation that you're saying that you think your child is trying to achieve control, which makes perfect sense right now, right? I think all of us, adults and children, are feeling this need to control something about our environments right now because so much is really out of our control at this point. And so I know for me, right, that kind of control is coming from trying to set up a schedule for myself and trying to feel like I can know when I'm going to take a walk or when I'm going to read a book, and knowing that I have that routine and at least control over those decisions that I'm making inside my home makes my anxiety decrease, right? So I think we want to think about kid-friendly ways of achieving that, which comes from these same strategies of just helping your child feel like they do have some level of control over the routine that's set up inside the home. They're able to make some choices throughout the day, even if that's simple choices like what I'm eating for lunch, right? I'm choosing between two items, what book I get to read, what movement activity I want to do. But just setting up some natural opportunities for your child to get to have some control in this challenging time without it needing to be coming from problem behaviors or argumentative behaviors. But this is certainly challenging, and I think you're pinpointing this piece, right, of that anxiety might be really at root here and causing a lot of this behavior. Really great question. How do I help my granddaughter of 14 smashing our house up when she doesn't have her own way? This is tough and certainly something we deal with a lot, but much, much harder, I will say, during our current circumstances, right? You guys are cooped up inside your houses, and so destruction of property, which is the term I use, is something that's really, really challenging right now. For a teenager, I think we go back to this same piece, right, of not wanting to address the behavior so much in the moment when your child is dysregulated or really is exhibiting these big behaviors. We all know as adults that when we're really angry, right, we're in the middle of feeling a big emotion, that's not usually the time that we're able to have such a rational conversation. So I think if we can apply, right, that concept that we experience as adults to how we think about how teenagers or kids are feeling, they too are likely not able to process or engage in such a rational conversation when they're experiencing that big emotion right in the moment. That said, we need to address it. And so just like with younger kids, thinking about finding a time where you're setting aside time to have a conversation, talk it through and problem solve, ask your granddaughter, how are you feeling and what's going on for you? And try to get a sense of what the feelings are that your child's trying to express in that moment, that they're using more negative behaviors, right, more problematic behaviors to express or to get what they're looking for. This also might be, right, they're trying to, same as with the ABC data, they might be trying to get something like a tangible, like access to a computer, access to the iPad, etc. So if that's the case, we want to think about a different set of strategies to make sure that we're reserving access to those items for only when your child or teen has gone through the day without exhibiting these major problem behaviors and has instead shown the opposite. They've stayed calm, they've followed the household rules, all of those pieces. So same principles, you guys will see, right? Same principles really do apply to our younger kids and our teenagers. It's just about sort of the depth of the problem-solving conversation that we're having that differs. But same ABC data, same consequences that you're thinking about putting in place, same reward systems. All right, taking a look to see if there's anything else coming through right now. Otherwise, I'll go back to a question that we got earlier. And this one's about teens too, so I guess I'll go here. We got a question earlier about a teenager who's resisting taking their ADHD medications right now. So the question was, my teenager has ADHD and doesn't want to take her medication. I think she needs it to do her work. Any suggestions? So again, I think this is a similar piece of wanting to really have a conversation and understand what the motivation is, right? So this theme is going through everything we're talking about today. It's understanding what's the function of that behavior, what's the motivation, and then we can really tailor our strategies and the way that we're responding accordingly. So it's hard to really know how to respond to a child unless we understand what the behavior is doing, right? What's the point? And so for this child, I'd really want to know a couple of things. I would want to know their reasons for thinking that they don't want the medication, right? Whether that's they don't think it's helping, they don't think they need it. You hear, right, those are really different things. And the way that we respond to them would be really different. If your child feels like it's not helping, that might need to be a conversation with the person who's prescribing those medications, right? That comes down to whether we have the right medication in place. If your child feels like they don't need it, that's something really different where we would actually want to be taking some data and information to share with them about the areas that are feeling really hard. So if schoolwork is taking much longer to complete than we would expect for a teenager, or your child's getting really frustrated as they're going through their schoolwork, and you know that that's because of their ADHD symptoms, that might be the information that we're bringing in a calm, right, collaborative conversation. That might be the information that you're bringing to your child if their reasoning is that they don't think they need it. So very different conversations depending on the function of behavior, where the resistance is really coming from. So same idea. You also want to loop in, right, your child's treatment team for sure, and also consider your child's goals. So same thing as before with getting your child to complete schoolwork, try to get a sense of your child's goals here and really be able to explain to them why taking the ADHD medication is so important for achieving those goals for them, right, if it's prescribed. All right, let's see, I think I'm going to go to one more question, which was about whether or not during this time it's appropriate to be giving your child chores to complete and whether that's okay. I really loved this question that I saw earlier because it's something that we actually talk about well outside of this current crisis. It's something that I've discussed with actually many schools and many parent groups about how giving tasks and chores at home is actually part of how we really both raise kids who feel like productive members of a community, right? They feel like productive members of a family system, a productive member of a classroom community, and also how we develop skills at the same time to be independent and self-sufficient. So I love that even during this crisis, you're thinking about ways to give your child chores and responsibilities. Some tips to make those most useful. First is that chores or responsibilities in the household don't have to be unpleasant. You actually can work with your child to find a task that they enjoy doing or that feels good to them. So whether that's something like feeding the dog, if they really, really love that dog, this might be something that, while helpful to you, is also fun for them, gives them a sense of mastery and control, going back to our earlier question about control. Having these tasks in the household can be a great way to feel a sense of control and mastery. So tailoring things to your child's interests, maybe they like to wash the dishes, that's great too. Maybe they want to vacuum, awesome, all very helpful and can actually be fun. The next piece is just to work with your child to set them up to be successful with that task so that it's not creating more work for you, but it's actually useful. So you might want to run through this task a few times with your child first, where you are setting them up maybe with a checklist, a visual of what they're supposed to do, practicing it a few times so that you know that they know how to do the task in the way that you want. And then if your child's resisting some of these tasks, we've got a couple of options. One is what we call the when-then rule, which just means that you're setting up a contingency where your child's only allowed to do something once they've done something else. So when you've done the dishes, then you can go watch TV. When you've done the vacuuming, then you can go and play. Or if your child's really struggling, you may need to set up one of these more reward-based systems like we talked about before, where your child is gaining access to preferred rewards, tangibles, and things like that on more of a point system based on their ability to engage in these chores. Similar to an allowance, right? But you can use things that aren't necessarily just dollars. So these are some options to give your child a sense of control and mastery in the current crisis, and also just to help you out a little bit. All right. I think I'm going to go with one more question that we just got live, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm an NYC DOE teacher. Oh, hello and thank you. I'm having parents contacting me with their concerns and anxieties of students. Besides calls, what is a strategy I can give parents at home to help their children struggling with anxiety? That's a question. Okay, great. So this is actually a question from Twitter. I love it. So great. Like I said, thank you. I think our teachers are working really hard right now to try to find ways to address all the needs of our kids in this really challenging time, also balancing their own families. So thank you to you, and really great question. I appreciate that you're trying to help families who are experiencing anxiety or whose kids are experiencing anxiety. Certainly something that we can share is, I think lots of folks are working on various social stories or stories that can be shared to explain this process to kids. And I certainly think that teachers, you know better than anyone what your normal classroom routines look like. And so any resources that you can share on how to explain the shift in routine back to home and how parents can set up similar routines for their child at home based on what's worked really well for your kids in your classroom, that's wonderful. And so whether that's in the form of something like a social story that's a bit more specific to your classroom environment or to the kids that you work with, that's wonderful, rather than some of these that have been pre-made for everybody. Or just being able to share, like I said, be able to share with the students, parents in your classroom what your typical routines are, how you typically run your classroom, so that they're able to put in place similar routines at home and use some of the tools and systems that have worked well for you. So if you've got a reward system in place, for example, that's been working really well for your students, share that information with families so that they can try to set up something similar and keep as much consistency as possible. I think that's a really great question and a great way, hopefully, to do more of a classroom-wide outreach rather than you having to take the time to have all of these individualized calls, which are challenging right now. Excellent questions, everyone. So I'm going to wrap us up and let you know how you can get access to more answers and more tips. And I hope everyone has a good weekend. So I just want to thank you guys for joining me. I hope it was helpful. We will have someone back here at 4:30 p.m. this afternoon answering more questions. And as always, the Child Mind Institute is here to help with mental health resources to address your parenting needs in this coronavirus crisis, no matter where you are. We have resources to help, from daily tips to consultations to gold standard telehealth treatments. Please go to childmind.org/coronavirus. Have a great weekend.